After 17 years, he finally returned to Korea, a country he hadn't seen in a long time. Before him, the familiar building looked unchanged, but the feeling of estrangement was palpable. As you approached the barrels, the inscriptions were clear: Yo Hee-song and Jin Sang-rak. He was there to visit his parents' graves, a moment that carried the weight of an absence of nearly 2 decades. Time had passed, but the pain of loss still echoed in his heart. As I stared at those engraved names, thoughts about the meaning of life began to arise. He asked himself, with a latent melancholy, what the value of life was. There were times when such reflection consumed him, especially when coming face to face with the graves of those who created him. The past, however, did not leave him alone. His mind went back in time 17 years to a stormy night in the Gulf of Aden. The sound of thunder echoed in his memory as if he were back in that exact moment of fear and tragedy. The storm raged all around, thunder echoed like an ominous call, and the sea became a chaotic battlefield. Amid the dark vastness of the choppy waters, he struggled desperately, his body being thrown from one side to the other, while his screams were lost in the immensity of the storm. His heart heavy, his mind confused, all he wanted was to find the familiar faces that seemed to have disappeared from his life the moment the chaos began. His words were carried by the wind, his vision was made difficult by the incessant rain and the waves that rose like walls, ready to swallow any sign of hope. He struggled, driven by instinct and desperation. The fear of never seeing his parents again drove him to continue, even though his body was exhausted, his muscles screaming for help. A flash of lightning lit up the sky for a brief moment, revealing her small silhouette adrift in the dark expanse, while the shadows of a ship in the distance appeared, distant, unreachable. Her cries for Mom and Dad were muffled by the storm, but in her mind they echoed with the force of an earthquake. He called out to them, but the answer that came was only the cruel roar of the sea. Suddenly, amidst the chaos, a body emerged. His eyes widened in horror as he recognized his mother, adrift, lifeless. Time seemed to stop. Pain took over every fiber of his being. He reached out, trying to reach what was left of the woman who raised him, but the relentless sea took her away, along with any hope he might have had. The boy found himself surrounded by the immensity of the ocean. The sky was closing in more and more, and his body seemed about to give way. The storm raged around him, and his only point of reference, his mother, was adrift. His mind was spinning in a whirlwind of emotions, between paralyzing fear and the urgency to save her. Every breath was a battle, and the sea continued to pull him down, as if it wanted to devour him. In a cruel instant, he was swallowed by the waters. The impact threw him into the depths of the ocean. The air was forced from his lungs, and the need to breathe overwhelmed him. His body reacted instinctively, trying to emerge back to the surface, but the water felt like a heavy blanket, pressing down on every inch of his being. His thoughts became a race against time. The realization that he was drowning intensified, and the urgency to return to the surface consumed him. He needed to climb quickly. He felt despair growing, but his body was already exhausted. The faint glow of surface light seemed so far away, almost unreachable, as shadows sank around them, bodies that had already been claimed by the ocean. Every second underwater was an eternity. He reached out, trying to reach what seemed out of his reach. The depths of the ocean revealed a tragic and dark scene. The bodies of people he knew, those who had been part of his life, floated inertly, enveloped in a stillness that contrasted with the violence of the surrounding waters. Among them, familiar figures Secretary Kim, Chief Jang, the ship captain, and even the bodyguard had all been swallowed up by the fatality of the situation. The boy, plunged into despair, found himself surrounded by shadows of the past, while cruel reality unfolded before his eyes. The sight of his dead parents, father and mother, floating within his reach, stabbed an unbearable pain in his chest. His mind screamed, but his body, still tired, could barely respond to the urge to reach them. It was as if everything was distant, unreachable, even there, so close. However, in the midst of that hell of water and loss, a figure emerged. His grandfather, President Jin Siako, rescued him with strength and determination. The momentary relief of being alive contrasted with the devastation of everything that had been lost. Even in that storm, the old man still believed that destiny was watching over them. But the young man knew that the internal storm would never calm down. The sea continued to be rough. The waves crashed violently against the bodies that were struggling to stay afloat. The boy, with despair written on his face, stared at the dark waters that had swallowed his parents. He knew they were down there, sinking deeper and deeper into the cold, unforgiving depths of the ocean. The pain of not being able to save them was suffocating, but his grandfather, with the gravity of someone who had already faced many storms in his life, knew that time was running out. Even in the midst of chaos and hopelessness, the old man knew there was something bigger at stake. He held the boy firmly and looked him in the eyes, conveying an unwavering seriousness. The words that came out of his mouth were a command, not just a plea. The boy should inherit Chingu. Nothing was more important at that moment than ensuring that the family legacy was maintained, and he must remember that at all costs. The grandfather placed a fountain pen in his grandson's hands, saying that lawyer Kim In-soo would help him when they arrived in Korea. The boy, however, still couldn't accept the reality unfolding before him. His heart begged for one thing: to save his parents. Even as his grandfather tried to give him crucial instructions, he cried out, with tears in his eyes, for the old man to rescue them first. The boy was caught between the desire to maintain his family's legacy and the desperate need not to lose those he loved. The waves continued to swallow everything around him, and the boy helplessly watched his life crumble before his eyes as his grandfather fought to keep him safe, reminding him of the importance of what was to come. The sea remained relentless, the waves roaring around him as the boy held on to his grandfather with all his strength. However, the old man, already injured and aware of his fate, knew he could not last much longer. In the midst of despair, the boy saw his grandfather's gaze soften, but also carry a cruel truth that he could barely process. Even before the ship sank, his parents had been murdered. The revelation hit him like a blow, removing any hope of rescue. His parents were already dead before the chaos even took hold. Even in his last moments, the grandfather remained firm in his conviction. He knew that the boy needed to survive, that the family's future depended on it. In a final gesture, he handed over to his grandson the responsibility of continuing the legacy. The last thing the old man asked, with his last strength, was for his grandson to live, no matter what happened. His hands separated, and the boy saw his grandfather being swallowed by the waters, while lightning lit up the sky and the sea shook even more violently around him. The boy, now alone, felt the emptiness deepen, both in the ocean and in his heart. The boy floated in the serene waters, in contrast to the chaos he had just experienced. His eyes, tired and blurred with pain and exhaustion, stared at the sky above, while his body allowed itself to be carried away by the current. The silence of the ocean felt distorted, as if he were in a bubble of isolation, far from everything that had just happened. For a moment, he gave in to exhaustion, the trauma still fresh in his mind, as the waters gently rocked him. Suddenly, his consciousness was filled with a vague realization. Something was different. He felt his body being pulled, his eyes widening as the glow of light reflected off the waters around him. In the distance, a vessel approached. The ship stood out on the horizon, its size imposing, but it was difficult to make out the details from a distance. The boy didn't know what to expect, but his exhausted body didn't allow him to fight the current. Soon, he was rescued and taken on board. When he opened his eyes, he saw two men looking at him in surprise. He had survived. The nightmare still seemed present, but for now, he was safe. Upon awakening, the boy noticed the commotion around him. Unknown men watched him with surprised expressions, exclaiming among themselves. They seemed relieved to see him alive, but something about the environment seemed off. As his vision cleared, he noticed details that added to his uneasiness: striking tattoos on one of the men's necks, signs that these people were not ordinary. The boy tried to remain calm as he processed where he was and who he was dealing with. He was taken closer to the deck, and as he walked, he observed the structure of the ship. The feeling of strangeness did not diminish. These men seemed to always be aware of everything around them, acting in a coordinated manner, as if they were part of something larger and dangerous. The boy quickly realized he was in unfamiliar territory, surrounded by individuals who had their own agenda. The boy found himself confronted by an imposing figure that had jumped in front of him, his posture menacing. She looked at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, clearly surprised by his presence there. He could barely process everything around him, still dazed by the recent events, but he realized he was surrounded by people who spoke a different language. The momentary confusion was interrupted when one of the men suggested that the boy did not understand what was being said. Despite everything, the boy understood some words and tried to explain his situation, mentioning the attack on the yacht where he was. This seemed to spark the immediate interest of the woman in front of him, who, now with a sly smile, understood that he understood more than he let on. She wanted to know more. The boy explained his situation, revealing his Korean origin and the attack he had witnessed. His parents and grandfather were murdered by armed men during a storm, and he had somehow been thrown overboard and rescued by an Italian ship. However, the mere mention of the Salerno family brought palpable tension to the air. He barely knew the power and reputation behind that name, but the men around him laughed at his story, doubting his words and the nearly impossible coincidences he claimed. The crew leader, Regina Salerno, didn't seem interested in mercy. In her hands, she held the power to decide the boy's fate. With calculated coldness, he questioned why he shouldn't be thrown back into the ocean. Danger was in the air, and the boy now found himself in the hands of a woman who clearly didn't believe in coincidences and was willing to do anything to protect her family's secrets and interests. The boy, in despair and uncertainty, took out the fountain pen that his grandfather had given him before disappearing into the depths of the ocean. That was his only asset, the only proof of who he really was. He firmly declared his identity, revealing that he was the grandson of the chairman of the powerful Chungu Group, one of Korea's largest corporations. That revelation sparked immediate interest in the men around him, especially the leader, Regina Salerno. The company name was clearly not unfamiliar to them. Realizing that his life was at stake, the boy argued that it would be more advantageous for them to return him to his country than to throw him overboard. He knew that his survival depended on convincing these individuals that he was more useful alive than dead. The mention of Chungu was enough to trigger a chain reaction, leading the crew members to investigate further into its history and seek confirmation about its true identity. The boy, with remarkable confidence, mentioned his ability to speak several languages, listing Cantonese, English, Japanese, Arabic, and others. His skills impressed those present, but the situation became serious when news from Korea arrived. The confirmation that his family's disappearance was under investigation added credibility to his story. The group around him began to treat him with more caution, realizing they were dealing with someone from a powerful bloodline. The leader, now with a renewed interest, saw potential in the boy and his connection to the Chungu Group. She weighed her options, realizing she could take advantage of the situation. The boy, still holding the fountain pen that his grandfather had entrusted to him, knew that this object could be the key to his survival and to connecting with those who could help him back in Korea. The game of interests had begun, and he needed to be prepared for the next moves. The boy asked that they not contact his family directly, suggesting that they contact someone else. His fear was clear. Involving his family at that moment could make the situation even more complicated. The scene then moved to Seoul, where, in the middle of the night, a renowned lawyer received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line, the woman at the head of the group who had rescued the boy, Regina, made an offer. With a photo of the boy in hand, she knew she had an advantage. The question hung in the air: return the heir to the Chungu Group or use him as a bargaining chip. The lawyer, understanding the weight of the situation, prepared to hear Regina's demands. Negotiations were about to begin, with the boy's future hanging in the balance. Regina set her conditions firmly. She demanded $10 million in cash, to be delivered within 24 hours to the Panama Canal. Her tone made it clear that there was no room for negotiation. She kept control of the situation, or so she thought. On the other end of the line, the lawyer, disinterested and busying himself with his glass of whiskey, seemed unimpressed. He made a provocative and thoughtless counteroffer, reducing the price drastically and suggesting that he could release the boy without further complications. His disregard for the situation was evident, showing that he would not be intimidated so easily. However, on the other side of the negotiation, something more sinister was unfolding. Amid an atmosphere of party and disorder, a man became exalted, offering $1 million to anyone willing to kill the boy. He barked orders, demanding that the work be done quickly and that a video of the act be sent as evidence. The boy's fate, already uncertain, now seemed to tip even further towards chaos, with multiple threats to his life emerging from all directions. The atmosphere was tense. The man on the phone was hesitant to go through with the plan, as he didn't trust he would receive the promised money. The threats around him increased his anxiety, but he knew he could not waver. On the other side, those who accompanied the boy hoped that something would be resolved quickly. The situation was reaching a critical point, and any mistake could mean the end for the young heir. The boy, however, maintained a determined expression. He understood the danger, but he was already beginning to understand the plays that were being made around him. Negotiations continued, and while chaos reigned among the surrounding mercenaries, he watched carefully, waiting for the right moment to act or be saved. At the same time, in a distant place, a mysterious man laughed, celebrating the chaos that had ensued in the Chengdu group, now apparently under his control. The boy knew that he was in a web of complex interests, and that his survival depended on every move he made from that moment on. The boy realized how imminent the danger was. The words echoed in his mind, he would be dead in 5 minutes. His heart raced as he realized his time was running out. The woman in front of him, Regina, no longer seemed interested in maintaining any disguise of diplomacy. The cold smile on her face clearly demonstrated that she had made a decision. She was holding the phone, showing the absolute control she had over the situation. Now, with the power of the Chengdu group seemingly beyond his reach, the boy was nothing more than a burden. Armed guards were waiting for an order, while he, vulnerable, begged for his life. However, the cruel reality was evident. His connection to the conglomerate was no longer enough to guarantee his survival. The boy began to process the shocking revelations he had just heard. His family was already doomed from the beginning, and now he understood that the Chengdu group's power was the real reason behind everything. His uncles, his relatives, everyone had decided to eliminate him to take complete control of the conglomerate. He found himself trapped in a web of betrayals, something he never imagined experiencing, especially coming from within his own family. As he tried to understand the extent of the conspiracy, his thoughts were filled with questions about his family's true role in that cruel world. Why did he, who barely survived, have to die by the hands of strangers? As he pondered his fate and his family's position, a loud sound interrupted the tension in the room. An attack was taking place, and the situation, which was already chaotic, was becoming even more unpredictable. Tension was quickly rising on the ship when the alarm of an imminent attack sounded. 3 speedboats and an armed helicopter were approaching, all ignoring any attempt at radio communication. Regina, perplexed, tried to understand who would dare approach with such audacity, especially disregarding security protocols. She deduced that the threat could be related to the call they had received earlier, probably someone trying to rescue the boy. His mind quickly formulated a theory: the invaders must be there to recover it. As confusion reigned, the boy, wasting no time, seized an opportunity and began to act on his own, fighting desperately for his survival amidst the growing chaos. The boy, exhausted and without options, understood that there was no turning back. With courage, he looked at Regina and declared that the Chengu group would never deliver the money she expected. Any hope of profit had disappeared, making its execution meaningless. The only path left was his survival. Determined to turn the tables, he offered to be loyal to the powerful Salerno family. In an act of desperation, he revealed the tattoo, a symbol he had seen and which, somehow, he now wore on his own hand. The Salerno tattoo, a symbol of power and control. His request was clear. He wanted the power to seek revenge against those who betrayed his family. The offer caught Regina by surprise, and for a brief moment, she let out an incredulous laugh. The boy was willing to do anything to survive and, more than that, to fight for something bigger. The tattoo connected him to the underworld he was barely beginning to understand, and his proposal put a new piece in the game that Regina perhaps hadn't anticipated. Regina, intrigued by the boy's bold proposal, ordered preparations for a festival to begin. She saw it as fun, something to test the determination of the young man, now marked with the Salerno family symbol. The boy, in turn, struggled to maintain his composure, knowing that any mistake could be fatal. His offer of loyalty and thirst for revenge were met with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. As Regina watched him with cold eyes, she questioned whether he really had the courage to get his hands dirty in search of power. The boy, remembering his grandfather's words about inheriting the Chingu Empire, knew he could not go back. The environment around her pulsed with tension, and her every step was measured, as Regina reveled in the game that was just beginning. The boy followed Regina without hesitation, aware that his life was now entirely in the hands of the Salerno family. The weight of his choices was already beginning to manifest itself, but he knew there was no going back. As she walked through the ship's corridors, the echo of Regina's words still resonated in her mind, to live and die for her family. He had sealed his fate. On deck, Regina took him to observe the armed helicopter that hovered in the sky, a foreshadowing of the kind of life he was now about to embrace. She stood firm, facing the horizon and, with 2 daggers in hand, declared that this would be the boy's future. The young man looked up, the sound of the propellers hitting the air mixing with the weight of the decision he had made. The life before him would be marked by battles, betrayals, and sacrifices. And, at that moment, he understood that the promise of power came with a high price. 17 years have passed since that fateful day. The boy, now a man, remained in front of the poles, the only place where he could pay his respects to his parents. Their ashes were never recovered, but that location symbolized the connection he still maintained with his past. Anger and the desire for revenge continued to consume his soul, and he swore that justice would be taken into his own hands. As he said goodbye, something unexpected happened. A sudden attack. Glass shattered, the sound of gunshots echoed, and he quickly realized he had been ambushed. But the attackers were inept. He silently despised them, aware of his superiority. Amidst the chaos, as he dodged the shots and prepared his response, he knew that the journey of revenge was just beginning, and nothing, and no one, would stop him from achieving his goal. The pursuit of the Chingu Group executive was ongoing. One of the corporation's security guards, Jong-suk, a robust man with a serious expression, was determined to capture him and find out who dared to kidnap him. The clues led to a suspicious car, identified as the vehicle used in the abduction, and the security guard, alert and calculating, alerted his team. If he's still alive, we'll need to be careful, he thought, calculating his next actions. The mission was clear: rescue the executive without him suffering any harm. The tension was palpable in the air. As the rescue team approached the car, Jong-suk's keen eye noticed something wrong. Suddenly, a violent bang shook the room. The car exploded in a devastating wave of heat and destruction. A bomb, thought Jong-suk, as his men's wide eyes reflected the horror of what had just happened. Before they could react, an imposing figure appeared amidst the chaos. Dressed in black, with an intimidating presence, she wielded a long, shiny blade. His expression was cold, and his movements were lethal. In an instant, chaos multiplied, turning the place into carnage. Without hesitation, the figure began to slash at Jong-suk's men with deadly precision, creating a red-stained scene. Jong-suk watched helplessly as his men were decimated. With each strike, the figure moved with predatory grace, its blade dancing in the air, claiming lives with frightening ease. The fight unfolded with brutal intensity. The man with the intimidating posture, confident in his bulletproof vest, observed the mysterious figure in front of him. The confrontation seemed inevitable. He was furious about the ambush, disdaining the tactic he considered cowardly. But the answer came in a cold and calculated way. In one swift movement, the young man launched a precise attack, his skills demonstrated in a devastating blow. The man, who until then had felt invulnerable, was hit hard, blood spraying as he could barely understand what had happened. The shock on his face was visible, unable to process his opponent's speed and skill. The young man, with a grim expression, watched his opponent crumble. What appeared to be a battle of unequal forces quickly became a display of lethal superiority. The man's desperate question echoed in his mind, how did this happen? But the answer no longer mattered. He was falling, completely defeated before he even understood the true extent of the power of those facing him. Tiha, now a young adult after 17 years of suffering and growing up, looked at the shelf of urns with no remains of his parents, just a painful reminder of the past. He knew his revenge was finally about to begin. All these years, Tiha had prepared herself for the inevitable confrontation with those who destroyed her life. Now, in a silent meeting with the missing remains of his family, he pledged to ensure that those who betrayed him paid with their lives. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire broke the silence at the memorial. The glass facade shattered into 1,000 pieces as Tiha quickly threw herself back, avoiding the attack. He looked at the snipers outside, their bullets hitting the marble and concrete without causing any damage. They were no threat to him. Tiha had become much more than they could have imagined. With agility, Tiha dodged out of the building, his mind already calculating his next move. As he ran, the enemies continued to fire, but their aim was imprecise and desperate. Chaos took over, but Tiha remained calm, determined. He approached a car parked nearby, showing no signs of concern, ready to continue with his ruthless plan. Inside the car, Tiha found an old acquaintance, the former executive director who had been one of the key players in the betrayal of his family. The man, visibly terrified, begged for mercy, claiming to have been just a pawn in the hands of others. But Tiha showed no mercy. The fate of all those involved was sealed from the moment they decided to destroy their family. He would not allow any of them to escape. Revenge, cultivated by so many years of suffering, was just beginning. Tiha approached the urn, staring at the place that, although empty of ashes, still represented the only refuge for her memories of her parents. It had been 17 years since that tragic incident, and his life had been shaped by the pain and revenge he vowed to seek. He spoke silently, asking his parents to watch him as he was about to bring justice for everything that had been taken from him. Suddenly, distant sounds echoed around the room. The window in front of him exploded into shrapnel as a runaway car sped by and armed men appeared, shooting at it. With skill and precision acquired over the years, Tiha dodged each shot, quickly fleeing the line of fire and hiding behind a nearby wall. A sarcastic smile crossed his face. Idiots, he thought. They can't even hit me. The attackers continued to shoot, but he was too agile, his skills unmatched. Soon, the surroundings became silent, except for the sound of sirens in the distance and the car quickly approaching to rescue him. He ran towards the vehicle without looking back, leaving a trail of destruction and bewilderment. He opened the car door and was greeted by a trembling figure, the former executive director who was now begging for his life. "Tiha, I just followed orders," shouted the man, fear evident in his eyes. Tiha showed no compassion, holding the suitcase of money tightly. The smell of freshly printed bills filled the air, but the hatred in his eyes overcame any material temptation. "That's what your promises are worth," thought Tiha, throwing the money at the man's feet, who writhed in despair. 17 years ago, The agreement was not fulfilled. Now, it's my turn to demand. The tension in the air was palpable. The man, sitting at the table, stared at the microphone in front of him. The gloomy environment around him reflected his state of mind as he pondered his next move. The traitor begs for mercy, but Tiha, consumed by revenge, does not give in. He lights a lighter, symbolizing the end of that cycle. The fire consumes the traitor, while Tiha, with the flame of revenge in his eyes, moves forward, determined to carry his family's entire legacy with him. A masked young man was crossing the city in a hurry, his determination visible in every step. Upon arriving at a building, he was intercepted by security guards who, armed, confronted him. Without hesitation, the young man eliminated them one by one, blood spraying the surroundings, but his expression remained unshakable. His coldness only increased as he got closer to his goal. Inside the building, he found the man he was looking for. The target's face was one of pure terror, without understanding what awaited him. The young man, now facing his prey, just stared at him in silence, the blood marks still fresh on his clothes. The tension in the air was palpable, and the man's fate was sealed. The protagonist, now a more experienced man, arrives at a place where security is on alert. Moving quickly and with lethal precision, he eliminates multiple enemies, leaving trails of blood as he goes. His mission is clear. He shows no hesitation as he infiltrates, cutting through any resistance that comes his way. His identity is a mystery to many, but his actions speak louder than words. Confronting a man arrested there, he reveals crucial information about a private security company linked to Chengdu, which carried out violent tasks such as kidnappings and murders. The protagonist discovers that the company was involved in shadowy activities and was part of a vast corruption network. He makes a point of eliminating all witnesses, ensuring that no one knows who he is or what he did. The protagonist, cold and calculating, follows his mission, determined to avenge his past and destroy those who harmed his family without leaving a trace. The protagonist was on a deadly mission, with a serious expression as he ran through the corridors, determined to eliminate his targets. His movements were quick and precise, without hesitation, eliminating everyone who stood in his way. After a series of brutal confrontations, he finally reached the heart of the operation, where the real perpetrators were. With surgical precision, he cut bonds and rescued the hostages, who could hardly believe they were being saved. The surrounding environment was a chaos of bodies and blood, a direct reflection of the brutality of the mission. However, for the protagonist, it was just another day at work, without emotion or hesitation. Even when faced with questions and uncertainty, he remained focused, knowing that he still had a lot to resolve. His mind was cold and calculating, always one step ahead. The constraints of his mission were clear: to complete the work without leaving a trace, without allowing any personal ties to interfere with his final objective. In a dramatic turn of events, Tiha, scarred by the past and the thirst for revenge, had finally reached the peak of his transformation. For years, he had planned and prepared his every move, knowing that his path was stained with blood and betrayal. With precise movements and without hesitation, he eliminated everyone who stood in his way, spilling blood as he went. Now, searching for crucial information to deliver the final blow, he confronted a reluctant informant who knew too much and feared for his life. Veiled threats were no longer effective against Tiha. He was willing to get every bit of the truth out, no matter the cost. His coldness stood out in contrast to the growing despair of his prisoner, who knew there was no way out. After extracting the information, Tiha walked away from the chaos he had caused, his clothes still stained from the confrontation. Walking through the busy streets, he pondered his next move, pondering small choices like lighting a cigarette to ease the tension before the next mission. Everything was falling into place, but Tiha knew that completion was still far away. After many years, the protagonist finally returns to Korea, but realizes that the country is in a chaotic state. The government promises severe action against crime, with the president declaring a direct war against criminal organizations. However, this attempt to regain control and eradicate crime ends in tragedy. The president, who sought to restore order, loses his life in 1990. This event marks the end of effective attempts to combat crime, and the nation then sinks further into a cycle of violence and corruption, with the power of gangs criminals growing uncontrollably. After a long time, he finally returned to Korea and watched as the country was in chaos, with crime and corruption spreading. Years ago, a president declared war on criminal organizations, but lost his life in 1990, after which society fell apart. The organizations gained strength, bribing the media and eliminating Chungu's competitors. The public, however, was distracted by sports and entertainment, forgetting about real politics, to the point that even an absurd presidential campaign went unchallenged. The country was gripped by an illusory perception that Chungu was a people's enterprise. Upon returning, he goes to a store where he buys Korean cigarettes, a gesture that signals his adaptation to the new environment and his preparation for what is to come. Two men enter a convenience store. One of them asks for a specific pack of cigarettes and mentions that he would like the plus one, but the attendant informs him that there is only one pack left. Given the situation, the first man, without showing much interest, suggests that the attendant give the cigarette to the other man accompanying him, signaling that he doesn't mind going without. Two men walk through the city streets. One of them is looking to borrow a cigarette. The interaction between them is light, with a touch of irony. One of the men, after mentioning that it has been a long time since his last visit to Korea, ends up accepting the cigarette his colleague offers, reminding him not to smoke in prohibited areas. They follow their paths, demonstrating discreet complicity in the city's busy daily life. The man observed the city, cigarettes in hand, reflecting on the years he spent in the mafia. He developed the ability to gauge someone's strength just by presence. As he thought about this, his attention was drawn to a figure in the distance. The guy was extremely powerful, to the point of comparing it to the monsters he had encountered abroad. There was something unique about that man, something that set him apart. The protagonist knew it would be a good idea to avoid crossing his path, at least for now. A man walks slowly through a scene of chaos and destruction, bloodied bodies scattered across the ground. He smokes calmly, watching the brutal aftermath of a massacre, where everyone is dead. He reflects on the size of the bodies, comparing them to the delicacy of sashimi, demonstrating his coldness in the face of the scene. While searching the place, he receives a call. Annoyed, he reminds the person on the other end of the line that he had asked not to be disturbed, especially knowing that he had an important meeting scheduled. Even in the midst of chaos, he maintains his calculated and distant behavior, a reflection of the cruel world in which he lives. The blond man walked through a devastated environment, with bodies scattered and marks of destruction everywhere. He lights a cigarette, calmly observes the scene, and realizes that everyone there has been killed, each one torn apart like thin slices of sashimi. Undeterred, he makes a call and, with a bored expression, asks for a meeting to be postponed. An assassin had eliminated Executive Vice President Kim In-soo, and now appeared to be on his trail. The blonde approached a window while reporting that the security team, which was supposed to provide support, had been completely eliminated. He also realized that the killer knew exactly where a secret Chungu family meeting would take place. The danger was intensifying, and he concluded that the attacker was no ordinary person. The enemy was well informed and appeared to closely follow the family's movements, increasing tension and a sense of urgency amid the chaos. In a dark room, marked by blood and scattered corpses, a man relaxes while smoking, attentive to what happened. The devastated scene is the result of a precise and brutal attack. As he reflects, he realizes that all the victims were killed with a sharp blade, something reminiscent of the size of sashimi, cut with unusual skill. He receives a call and, after a brief exchange of words, is alerted to the approach of someone dangerous. The same person who had already killed one of the executive vice presidents. The threat was now aimed squarely at him, and his ally reports that the security team had been completely annihilated. Upon realizing the gravity of the situation, the man decides to postpone his plans, now aware that he is being hunted by someone extremely skilled. He makes a connection between the attacker and a secret family tradition, which appears to have been violated. The information disturbs him, and he instructs his subordinate to find the attacker without arousing suspicion. Reflecting on the nature of the attack, the man recalls a recent encounter where a stranger had asked to borrow a cigarette. The memory of a specific detail, a scar on the man's palm, makes him connect the dots. The scar could only be inflicted by someone who skillfully wields blades. Within a tense environment, a man, belonging to the Osung faction and identified as Chinheman, reflected on the chaos caused by someone who wielded a blade, an unusual type of weapon among his subordinates, people he described as incapable of even cutting an apple. He had been given the responsibility of dealing with this threat, someone who knew deep-rooted family secrets, something only a few were supposed to know. While Heeman tried to remain calm, he asked for security to be reinforced and promised a large sum of money to protect the place. However, as he headed to the meeting, he questioned the arrogance of the messenger who instructed him, irritated by the superior tone of someone he considered to be just a gangster. Heeman walked through the dark streets, reflecting on his decision. He had accepted a large sum of money to help the Chingu group, and now he was on a mission that seemed to involve much more than he expected. As he walked, he pondered the proposal and the situation he was about to face. Despite the impressive amount of money on offer, he felt there was something dangerous lurking. The instructions he received were vague, which increased his distrust of the task in front of him. A man walks through the dark streets, clearly in a state of tiredness and worry. He tries to maintain control while talking on the phone, but the situation is already getting out of control. When he hangs up, he reflects on how things are going from bad to worse. Suddenly, another man appears, someone he didn't expect, and the tension in the air increases. The conversation between them quickly turns into an exchange of provocations, creating an atmosphere of inevitable confrontation. The newcomer shows that he was watching everything closely, revealing that he knew every move, something that leaves the first man irritated and tense. The situation escalates, and the two men prepare for a possible clash. Both seem determined to test their skills and resolve whatever is pending between them. The tension is palpable, and everyone mentally prepares for what is to come. The mysterious man, still shrouded in shadows, faced his opponent in front of him with a faint smile. He knew he was involved in something big, even without completely revealing his identity. His movements were precise and calculated, demonstrating an unusual level of skill. Suddenly, the tension increased. Without warning, the mysterious man drew his hidden weapon, quickly charging at his opponent. The other, surprised, barely had time to react, his eyes widening as he realized the imminent danger. The sound of steel echoed as the two faced each other in an intense confrontation. Swords clashed, sparks flew as both tried to surpass each other in speed and strategy. The confrontation between the two rivals reaches its climax. In a quick exchange of blows, the swords cut the air with precision. Both demonstrate extreme skill, but the mysterious young man manages to surprise his opponent, cutting his weapon in mid-motion. In an instant, the battlefield changes, and the opponent, now confused, realizes that he has been disarmed without even realizing the exact moment it happened. He searches for his opponent, but the young man has already disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the echo of his speed and precision. On an urban night, tension builds in the dark streets as an imminent confrontation unfolds. On one side, an experienced combatant skillfully maneuvers with a blade, reflecting the moonlight in quick, precise movements. He faces formidable opponents who seem to jump out of the shadows, surprising with their agility and strength. The battle is intense, the blades cut the air, and the danger is palpable. The situation intensifies when the main combatant, after a series of offensive maneuvers, discovers that his opponent is not just any opponent, but part of a more sinister and powerful force, possibly linked to larger and darker machinations. The discovery that these are not just ordinary gangs, but monsters in human form, raises questions about the true threats lurking in the city's shadows. The shock of this revelation is followed by a reluctant recognition that despite the risks and imminent danger, the fight must continue. The combatant's determination is clear, as his mission is to protect not only himself, but also those who are unwittingly involved in this hidden war. He prepares to face whatever comes, hoping that his skill and courage will be enough to overcome the challenges ahead. The confrontation between the two characters continued intense. The brown-haired man tried to defend himself with a knife, but his opponent, skilled and calm, pressed him relentlessly with a sharper blade and superior technique. With each blow, the man in the black suit disarmed and dominated the situation, throwing his opponent to the ground with surgical precision. The fight was unequal, and the inevitable result was approaching. Even defeated and fallen, the man on the ground insisted on provoking him, stating that the other would regret leaving him alive. The expression of defiance didn't leave him, even though he was injured and didn't have the strength to continue. A tense confrontation unfolded. After a brief, intense fight, both opponents appeared cautious and calculated. The fighter with the cigarette in his hand reflected on how close he came to losing his life, with the realization that his strength was not enough to deal with such formidable opponents. On the other side, the rival, cold and ruthless, imposed his own rules, establishing clear limits. He demonstrated absolute control over the situation, making it clear that if the enemy was in fact associated with the Chingu group, he would already be dead. The battle was more of a power play than a simple physical clash. The final warning was direct. His rival allowed him to live, but there would be no second chance if he got involved with the organization again. The price for the opponent's life, symbolically, was a simple cigarette, an ironic exchange given the gravity of the situation. As the victor walked away, the loser contemplated the significance of this small object as a reminder of his survival. The enemy, now in his car, was mulling over the outcome of the encounter, frustrated and dissatisfied, although he was clearly in control. The man is injured, but is able to move and continue with his plan. There are 32 minutes left to complete his 17-year revenge. As he drives, his focus is intense, determined to accomplish his goal. However, his painful memories come flooding back. Scenes of blood and suffering haunt him, especially the memories of Tiha, who tried to protect him from the horror he witnessed. The past and present merge, but he knows he can't waste any more time. Every minute counts until the end of your revenge. The scene takes place in a tense environment, where a young man, upon seeing his father seriously injured, falls into despair. The father, even in the midst of chaos, orders his son and his mother to flee quickly, realizing the danger that surrounds them. The reluctant son hesitates, but his mother tries to pull him away. Meanwhile, armed attackers approach, bringing even more panic to the situation. Screams echo as the mother tries to save her son, but the terror of the imminent threat creates a climate of inescapable despair. At the crucial moment when they find themselves in danger, a woman instructs Tiha to look for a life jacket and jump into the sea. With a soft smile, she encourages him to survive. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the boat, an operation appears to be about to escalate quickly. The henchmen are ordered to eliminate everyone and blow up the place, generating increasing tension. Upon realizing that the invaders are speaking Korean, Tiha is overcome by panic, but the woman urges him to escape as quickly as possible. The tension of the escape is evident, with Tiha running desperately through the corridors while his savior screams at him to hurry. A young man, visibly terrified, runs through a storm toward the sea, while the ship in the background explodes into flames. He screams in despair as the vessel sinks, aware of the loss he had just witnessed. The scene then shifts to a secret annex in Gangbok, where a meeting between powerful members of the Chingu family takes place. Jin Joo-hee, the eldest daughter and director of the group, sips her wine, wanting to know who was responsible for executive director Kim In-soo's death. Meanwhile, his brother, Jin Jae-song, speculates dismissively, suggesting that the crime was an act of passion, as In-soo was hiding other families. Their conversation reveals a disregard for Kim's personal life, with Joo-hee expressing her disgust at the man's actions. The tense atmosphere continues as they reflect on family secrets and the complications that these revelations can bring to the group. In the midst of a storm, a young man desperately tries to escape a dangerous situation on a ship. He follows instructions to survive, but as he runs for his life, the ship is taken over by explosions. Chaos reigns, and the rough sea seems to consume everything around. Meanwhile, in a secret annex, members of the powerful Jin family gather around a luxurious table. Jin Joo-hee, the eldest daughter, questions who could have killed CEO Kim In-soo, while other family members express contempt and disdain. The conversation reveals dark secrets and troubled relationships between them. Jin Yi-seong, the second son, jokes about In-soo's double life, while another family member, Jin Jong-won, the fourth son, is already more focused on resolving issues of power and inheritance. With the atmosphere tense and conflicting interests, Jin Gun-ho, the eldest son and current leader, maintains control of the situation, calling everyone to a more strategic meeting and revealing that there are few survivors left of the massacre that occurred. Meanwhile, in a secret annex, members of the powerful Jin family gather around a luxurious table. Jin Joo-hee, the eldest daughter, questions who could have killed CEO Kim In-soo, while other family members express contempt and disdain. The conversation reveals dark secrets and troubled relationships between them. Jin Yi-seong, the second son, jokes about In-soo's double life, while another family member, Jin Jong-won, the fourth son, is already more focused on resolving issues of power and inheritance. With the atmosphere tense and conflicting interests, Jin Gun-ho, the eldest son and current leader, maintains control of the situation, calling everyone to a more strategic meeting and revealing that there are few survivors left of the massacre that occurred.